Welcome, everyone. Artificial intelligence is increasingly being leveraged in ways that affect our everyday lives. Whether you're a consumer, a business professional, a student, a child, or a parent, we feel its effects in our everyday lives, well beyond the digital world in which we live, influencing what we buy, how we receive and keep up on our news, how we socialize with our friends and family, and how we conduct our financial affairs. While AI has arguably delivered on much of its promise to improve lives and work, it has its limits. There is a real risk that information harvested and leveraged by AI tech can be used unethically to gain competitive advantage in today's world. So, what can business do about this? Where is business in all of this? When it comes to integrated risk management systems, AI plays a central role. AI can deliver a better customer experience, make us more agile. In short, allow us to really respond to risks faster and better. So our panel today is really answering questions of how do we deploy AI? How do we make sure it's ethical, sustainable, and fair? What are the challenges that we see when we're rolling out new AI tech or new algorithms? And finally, what can we do as business professionals to ensure that we get ahead of this wave and make sure that AI, for good for all, delivers on its promise? Today, we have 4 wonderful panel members, each of them looking and grappling with AI from different dimensions. First, we have Piyush, Kumar, Chowhan, CIO of Lulu International, really at the center of what's going on in hypermarkets, how people buy. We also have with us Bhaskar Dasari, who is the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of Vivid Edge Technologies, working with customers all over the world, helping them build and deploy fair and ethical technologies. And Thomas Berngruber, who is the Head of Data Analytics and Development at Jyske Bank. And then finally, Elaine Grunewald, co-founder of the AI Sustainability Center, a leading think tank on how to deploy AI frameworks for ethical and sustainable AI in the Nordics. Welcome, everyone. I'd like you to take a moment, each of you, to introduce yourselves more fully and share with us where your passion for AI resides. Over to Piyush to begin.
Thank you. It's great to be here with this esteemed panel, and I hope that the discussion here will be useful for some of our audience as they listen. In terms of the background, I have been in the retail tech industry for close to over 2 decades. I started my journey with working with likes of Best Buy and Target in the US in the early part of the career, then moved to retailers like Tesco, Walmart in the later part, in the mid part of the career, which has actually built me a lot of interest and passion around how do you deal with consumers and how do you use data to kind of influence and kind of change the buying behavior so that you are able to target them better, so that you are able to manage them better. And what I'm going to talk today is some of the aspects that I've seen as to how do you do it ethically, how do you do it with the right intent, so that we are actually on the right side of the customer and the customer experience. So over to the other panelists, and as we speak on the other subjects.
Great. Over to Thomas, grappling with the trust model in financial services.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here. Happy to be here. My background is within financials. I've spent most of my professional career with portfolio management, risk management, especially in banking. Been working as an external lecturer for a decade roughly, teaching within the same areas as well. Being part of that business area, it's become a passion for me to uh, find a way to give sound investment advice for everyone. I feel like saying. I think the business model within banks, especially, and I would assume in most advisory business models, have the same problem, that they're not really that scalable. So when we are talking about individual advice, there are some challenges that needs to be looked into, and one way of offering scalability is through the use of AI. Thank you.
Thank you. Bhaskar, could you give us a little background on Vivid Edge and what has drawn you into this incredibly powerful use case?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me part of the panel. Good morning, everyone, and good evening as well as good afternoon to people all over the world. I've been in the industry for about 30 plus years, and was a senior director at Oracle, doing Oracle project manufacturing release. I've been pretty much a lot of exposure on large scale ERP initiatives. That's what I've been doing at Oracle. And passion is to, at Vivid Edge, we've been focusing on how to help clients bring in alignment on people, process, technology, maturity to business strategy, and been a big proponent of SaaS for standardization, simplification, and streamlining, leveraging GRC, ML, and AI solutions. And invested currently in building data lake frameworks as trusted gateways for data exchange platforms, and make enterprises seamless and risk aware and integrated is what we are trying to go after.
Thank you so much. Elaine, can you explain a little bit of your background, which has always been in sustainability, and what led you to found the AI Sustainability Center in the Nordics?
Thanks, Joe. And let me begin by also thanking MetricStream for bringing this important topic of ethical AI to the broader world of GRC. I think the timing is just spot on. I spent 20 years in the technology sector, most of that time working for Ericsson, a Swedish telecom company, and working with a concept and also a personal belief around what we call technology for good. And that was looking at how mobile communication could bring accessibility, affordability, and basically undisputed benefits to anyone on the planet. And in my career and over time, a number of things started to happen in the later phases. We had Snowden, we had Cambridge Analytica. More recently, we have the movie The Social Network, which I hope everybody's seen. And it really started to make me question a number of things about how do we really ensure that all of this data-driven technology is really being driven as a force for good for people and society. And so I wanted to work with how we can drive that agenda from a business perspective. And these days we see that so many companies want to do the right thing. The whole concept of, purpose-driven business is exploding. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence out there showing that purpose-driven companies are outperforming the stock market, et cetera. And so this was the backdrop that led me to co-founding the AI Sustainability Center, which really has a mission to start to develop practical tools to help any business anywhere start to understand what those impacts of data-driven technology are on people and on society, in the same way you would look at your own revenue gains or cost opportunities. So that was really the backdrop, and I know we'll come more into those topics during the session, but also just want to comment that I just published a book on this topic, which is called Sustainability Leadership, a Swedish approach to transform your company, your industry, and the world. And that's really, that book is just laying out a roadmap for anyone who wants to increase their ambition and sustainability in the private sector, not least of which in the world of data-driven tech.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I'm sure a lot of people are now Googling your book, trying to get a handle on how they can get it in their hands. It's a very useful framework for sure. Piyush, could I begin with you? Could you speak a little bit about deeper dive into the use cases around hypermarkets and the consumer end of things for AI? A lot of people are very concerned and interested to hear what the larger hypermarket platforms are really doing and what is their vision. Where is this going? Have we harnessed the risks associated with runaway AI, for example?
Sure,
Over
and I
to
think
you.
I'll give a little background of how the retail industry has transitioned itself. We have moved retail from being product centric, and we have kind of learned that as part of our MBA, the 4 Ps of marketing and so on and so forth. Now all that is a thing of the past. What retail companies are today are predominantly customer data companies, and that's the reality. What it kind of creates is large pools of data which are residing within retail companies, and the differentiator in today's play is going to be how much of data of the customer that you have, how much of interaction data of the customer that you have, how much of behavior data of the customer that you have, and how you are able to churn that data, how you are able to get intelligent insights of that data, so that then you are able to personalize that offering to the customer. Now, from the days we have been working with Walmart and Tesco's of the world, it was all about building large supply chains, building an assortment which is very unique, so that you are able to differentiate with the retailers. And suddenly, with the advent of digital, you are now kind of boomeranged with a set of organizations and a set of companies who are just creating so much of information about customers, and with that insight of the customers, they are able to target the data, target the products very differently as compared to the physical retail customers. And that shift, to me, has kind of created a digital divide, and that is why you are seeing a lot of these not so digital native companies are actually struggling to compete with the digital natives, and they are not able to personalize the offerings and change the offerings on the fly, so that they are able to kind of create that stickiness with the customer and not able to build a long-term loyalty with the customers. Couple of use cases. Obviously, as you would know, the purchase cycle is no longer limited to the physical or the point of purchase, as we call it. It is extended to pre-commerce, and it is extended to post-commerce. So there is a lot of interventions which are required for any retailer at the moment to basically influence the customer or kind of target the customers in the way they would want. In terms of pre-commerce, there are a lot of these automated marketing platforms which are out there, which basically analyze a lot of your browsing behavior, a lot of your behavior of where you are going, what you are doing, and things like that, so that you are able to kind of create a bouquet of marketing ads which come and are presented in front of you. Then once you have kind of made up a choice how you can use digital to kind of create a convenience platform, so that you're able to transact that better. And it does not stop there. After that, you kind of move to the post-purchase journey, in which once you have kind of tasted the success of that convenience, how you are able to then do retargeting and do again reach out to them again and again, so that your upsell and the cross-selling parameters can work in. So I think it is this entire pre-commerce, commerce, and post-commerce journey, wherein a lot of AI tools are being built which are personalizing the offerings, and they are able to target the customers better. To some, this may sound a little scary, that you know everything about the customer. And believe me, if somebody has been on Amazon or any other platform for about 15-20 years, they would know that those platforms know more about your shopping behavior than you do. They would exactly know what you did 10 years back, 7 years back, 6 years back, how your personalization preferences are changing, and so on and so forth. And hence, it is very important that whichever organizations are using this data, they do it with the right intent. And that, I think, to me, is a big theme of AI for good. And how can we be more responsible with the data that we are capturing from the customer, and are able to use it for the good of the society and the good of the customer, and not only look at profits as a primary goal in driving those interactions with the customer in a digital format.
Thank you, Piyush. That was a great overview of the use cases pre and post in commerce. We'll get to the challenges next question. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, how do we ensure that it is really indeed for the good? Over to Thomas. Thomas, you're doing some very interesting things in advisory in the financial industry around banking and wealth management. Talk to us a little bit more about the use cases and where you see AI is really helping out.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think the financial industry can learn a lot from the retail sector in general, and the way personalized consumer experiences are being created. Secondly, reaching out to every single client with individual suggestions according to the preferences is something that I think most advisory solutions should be jealous of, and this is exactly what we are trying to do, as you mentioned. I'll start off by saying that in the financial industry, it's my experience that most solutions are inwards. Of course, there could be a chatbot, which we see in most places, but you could then argue how much AI is in them, and I guess it depends on which chatbot you're looking at. Some of them might just be rule-based, and they're not necessarily storaging that much information about the client. But when we're looking at inwards projects, it could be fraud detection, for example, absolutely for the good, I would say. Money laundering detection in the end as well. But I think what's lacking in the financial industry is exactly this client focus, customer focus. So looking at it, in my opinion, we're looking at a business model where we have to give individual advice. We know everything about the customers in the bank. Every single transaction is stored just by construction. So it's highly data-based, but not necessarily data-driven yet. And this interaction can be improved, and that will benefit the client in the end, because it means we can give them advice that is actually relevant for the individual, for the single person receiving it, and not a general uniform way of communicating with clients. So I think it's very exciting, and it's definitely something that has potential, and I would describe it as AI for the greater good.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas. Bhaskar, you've worked with companies the world over, implementing AI frameworks, tools, integrating it into a larger data lake and analytics framework. What are you seeing as the major use cases and challenges that are occurring right now?
I think some of the things that I see in the manufacturing sector, they're going through a tremendous change, and they're being actually driven by Industry 4.0 guideline that started in Germany in 2011. And I think a lot of catch-up is being done by a lot of manufacturing companies on Industry 4.0, which basically calls for smart manufacturing, implementation of robotics, and IoTs, and pretty much intelligent automation across the board. And one of the use cases that I look at, which is around predictive maintenance and computer visioning. Those are the two I would like to talk about. And both are pretty promising, and actually people have successfully deployed predictive maintenance in many organizations. Primarily, maintenance by nature is, they would like to essentially minimize the cost at all times, but it's been reactive and preventive. Those were the two techniques that pretty much were being in use, and they've seen that production failures could be very costly. So they kind of put in a lot of effort to see how they could predict a failure of an equipment, and essentially asset health became very important. And there's a lot of IoT enablement that has happened of the equipment, and because of that, there's a lot of data coming out, which is kind of giving us a sense of what's the overall health of the equipment and when it would probably fail. And knowing that it can fail at a certain point of time, you can pretty much schedule your preventive maintenance accordingly. And you could also predict the asset life through this method. And there's a lot of AI and ML that's been utilized there. And I think from predictive, now it has progressed to prescriptive maintenance, where they're looking to essentially give suggestions based on previous repair history on what exactly is the repair that is needed on that particular asset in a proactive way, or anticipated repair that they're expecting. So this way they could be more proactive. And there's also a conversational AI that is being enabled with the repair technicians. So that way they could essentially communicate much more closely without having to go to the field where the equipment is. And if you talk about, electricity generation and transmission company, they would have a lot of substations in the field. But because of the communication between the substation and the centralized computers, they're able to still proactively manage before the transmission lines fail. They're able to maintain. So that's one of the use cases. The other one being the computer visioning, which is also enabled a lot of manufacturing companies to manage their inspection process in a much more automated fashion. So essentially, whether you're an automotive manufacturer or you're a pharmaceuticals manufacturer, varying needs of inspections are there. For example, pharmaceutical companies look for, making sure they don't print their labels incorrectly, as an example, while the automotive ones are looking for making sure there are no scratches and dents and, missing assembly parts and so on and so forth. And these high resolution cameras with appropriate light sources, they're able to detect what a human eye cannot detect, and they're able to essentially, prevent, something like an expired, suppose the label on the medicine is illegible, and now it goes into the marketplace. It could really cause definitely somebody consuming an expired medicine. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of responsibility that manufacturing companies are trying to embrace, and making sure that the intent is to essentially do a lot of good AI out there. And those are some of the use cases that I would like to cite. And from a financial analytics standpoint, also, I think, as already the other panelists has stated, the data is being analyzed to understand anomalies or patterns, and be able to essentially comment about them, and ultimately create something like a virtual auditors or virtual assistants for in the financial analytics space.
Thank you, Bhaskar. That really outlines where AI is delivering lower cost of ownership, lowering risk, and helping companies and manufacturers in particular gain efficiencies. I'd like to move over to Elaine, and could you speak a little bit to the risks, the inherent risks that are in AI frameworks and algorithms, moving on to not just the promise, but where we need to really watch out for runaway AI.
Great, yeah. And I think that, listening to all these use cases, I think the benefits of AI are, we're at the tip of the iceberg. There'll be so much more evolution of technology and technology deployment on how not just AI, but data-driven solutions more broadly. I mean, AI depends a lot on the digital maturity of the organization. So some organizations or public sector might be in a very early stage of that AI deployment or data-driven solutions for marketing or data analytics for different purposes, or you might be at the very front end of that and really driving that development. And then there's a lot in between. So I think first thing when we talk about AI and ethical AI, I think we have to recognize that there, are these differences on this spectrum of how digitally mature a company or even an industry might be. And then, this emergence of responsible or ethical AI, those were buzzwords for the last couple of years, but now they're truly emerging more like a discipline, no longer just a headline. You have the EU trustworthy AI guidelines. You have a lot of work being done in the UN, for example, within UNESCO and many other organizations, trying to recognizing that there are risks and pitfalls and trying to get a handle on that and set some, ethical rules of the game, if you will. But I would say, regardless of the sector or the size of the company or the organization, you could be an early stage startup or a large industrialist company. But what we see in AI Sustainability Center is a number of common what we call pitfalls emerging. And this is based on years of research that we did with 6 universities in Sweden. And those pitfalls that we tend to look at in our assessment are things like data bias and bias of the creator. Those are two that are really zeroed in on bias, and that could be related to the data you use, or it could be related to the person programming or coding in your organization, setting the decision rules for the algorithm. Are they intentionally or unintentionally programming their own bias? So that's definitely an area that we look at. Then we have another pitfall that we call immature AI or immature data in AI, which means how are you building your algorithms? Are you using training data? Is that data an accurate reflection of the reality in which the solution will be deployed? And does your organization have controls in place to determine when the solution is mature enough to be deployed on the market? So that's another area we think organizations need to look at. And then the last area is what we call misuse or overuse of data. Many times a company could design a solution for a certain purpose, but then learn that that purpose is being misused by others in their value system, where the data is overused for purposes it wasn't intended. An example of that is what the cell phone industry had in the US a few years ago. There was a study by the New York Times that showed third-party companies were actually using that data to do some very privacy intrusive tracking on mobile subscribers all over the country, which certainly wasn't the intention within the industry. So with these types of pitfalls in play, we think it's a great challenge for all the use cases we talked about, whether that's banking or whether that's smart manufacturing, to start to look at things like, do we have a good governance solution? Do we have accountability? Do we have explainability of our models? And is there transparency? So while these ambitions to be ethical or responsible out there, it's really important to measure, those aspirations with what's actually being deployed in the market based on data from individuals, for example. So that's a bit of I would say, the challenge landscape.
Great, thanks so much. So in our last 2 minutes, let's do rapid fire. 30 seconds, each of you, to give the advice that you have top of mind on how to ride this wave and get the best out of AI for good for all. Over to Piyush, 30 seconds.
Sure. So I think in any AI solution, there are two ingredients. The one is data and the second is intent. So Elaine was talking about the intent, where the bias can be built in or bias is inherently there. And what is the outcome? So with data and intent, you create an outcome. Now we have to make sure that we are self-governed. There are ethical practices which are already laid down in the organization, so that you are able to create an outcome which is not detrimental to the customer or the consumer of that AI, but try to make sure that it is in favor of the consumer. And these kind of ethical standards need to be set up right within, which is building AI for good as a philosophy within the organization, so that they are able to create things, and we don't have to kind of as was given in the interview by the Netflix CEO, saying that what is your main competitor, and the Netflix CEO said it is sleep. So we don't create solutions which actually are detrimental towards that for a profit motive. That's what I would say.
Great, thank you so much. Over to Thomas, 30 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's a tough one, actually, in 30 seconds. But still, I think coming from a highly regulated industry, it's quite interesting how immature this area is, governance on the AI area, especially when you compare it to the power and what you can achieve with it, good and bad. So I have, to a high degree, a model background, and our focus is, as Elaine also mentioned, bias. So I think eliminating bias is close to impossible, but being aware of the bias you actually have and being transparent about it could be a good first step, at least. So transparency, in a way, could become not an exact solution, but to some degree a solution to bias issues. And of course, then you would have to balance that with your intellectual property rights, right? So you can't be completely transparent. So I think it's yeah, and then we would need authorities and the help from Elaine to get them moving. I would assume as well, to get some proper regulation. I think an advice could be that if you're not regulated, then act as if you were.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That's great. Okay, over to you, Bhaskar, to take us home with this in this unregulated field. Your last words of advice. How can we get on top of this wave, ahead of it, and make it happen?
The two quick things that I would like to add in the interest of time would be GRC considerations by design. Essentially, somehow the AI practitioners, institutions, as well as businesses, they all need to essentially, from conception to design to prototyping, they need to think how to build the considerations for governance, risk, and compliance within their by design, which was what was done for security by design when internet originally started. There was a lot of hacking that was done, and the people who founded internet thought that they had a pretty good design, but they saw immediately in 1988, I remember Morris Worm hit the internet and brought all the computers down, and they quickly realized that they have to go with security by design as a concept. I think somewhat take a leap from that experience and implement the same in the AI world, although it's not very easy to eliminate bias and other things. But I do believe that in the absence of predefined laws, all AI practitioners and they all need to live by a common oath, like the medical professionals, and they should be able to come up with an open consortium at a city, state, country, and international levels in active participation. And someday we will be able to figure out a more standardized way to even sort of address bias, although it's not very easy, but I think we'll get there.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. I want to thank all of our panel members. This is an incredibly interesting topic, and it's not the end of it. It's just begun. As Elaine said, we're at the tip of the iceberg. We're going to learn more. AI, ethical AI by design, great concept, Bhaskar. And let's just continue to work more ethically, get the human in the loop, and build these frameworks out into the fabric of our operational systems in an ethical, sustainable, and fair way. Thank you, everyone.